On a warm autumn afternoon in April 1996, visitors wandered through the historic site of Port Arthur in Tasmania, soaking up the scenery and history of the old penal colony. Families, tourists, and locals alike moved between the ruins and the Broad Arrow Cafe, unaware that within the hour, Australia would be changed forever. The Port Arthur Massacre, as it would come to be known, remains the deadliest shooting in Australian history. 35 people were killed and another 23 wounded. The tragedy shocked not only Australia, but the world, sparking a complete overhaul of the country's gun laws. A snapshot of the day, the 28th of April 1996. The gunman was Martin Bryant, a 26-year-old from Hobart, described as socially isolated and often unsettling to others. Bryant had a long history of behavioral issues. On this day, he was armed with a semi-automatic Colt AR-15 rifle and deep-seated grievances, particularly against David and Noeline Sally Martin, owners of the Seascape Guest House, a property Bryant's father had once coveted. Bryant's attack began earlier than many realize with the murders of the Martins at Seascape. Although the precise time of their deaths is uncertain, they were confirmed dead by around 12:35 p.m. when an unsuspecting couple arrived to inquire about accommodation and were briskly turned away by Bryant. Shortly after, he set off for Port Arthur. Journey to Port Arthur, the prelude, driving his yellow Volvo 244. Bryant made casual conversation with locals and tourists along the way, even inviting to individuals to join him for a drink at the Broad Arrow Cafe. These interactions, seemingly benign, would later become chilling footnotes to a tragedy. Arriving at the historic site just after 1:10 p.m., Bryant initially parked improperly and was asked to move by security. He repositioned his car, retrieved a sports bag and a video camera, and wandered into the busy cafe. Sitting on the deck, he ate a light lunch, chatting awkwardly with others, mentioning the number of wasps around and the drop in Japanese tourists that day. Observers recalled him appearing tense, glancing often at the car park. The Broad Arrow Cafe, 1:30 p.m. Inside the bustling cafe, Bryant casually returned his lunch tray, then placed his sports bag on an empty table. What followed took barely 15 seconds. Drawing out his semi-automatic rifle, he opened fire. His first victims were Malaysian tourists Moyi William Ng and Su Leng June. Kate Scott was killed instantly. Her boyfriend survived with a graze. Jason Winter, a winemaker from New Zealand, heroically tried to defend his family, but was later killed. Chaos erupted. Anthony Nightingale stood to protest, only to be shot dead. Bryant continued shooting indiscriminately, killing Kevin Sharp, Walter Bennett, and Raymond Sharp as they sat unaware. Others were injured by bullet fragments and a desperate attempt to escape. Tony Kiston and Andrew Mills Rose, but were both fatally shot. Meanwhile, some survivors managed to drag others to safety beneath tables. Carolyn Lawton threw herself over her daughter Sarah, but Sarah had already been fatally shot. Mervyn and Mary Howard were next, killed near the cafe windows. By the time Bryant exited towards the gift shop, 12 were dead and 10 injured. Terror in the gift shop. 1:31 p.m. Bryant moved swiftly into the adjacent gift shop. Nicole Burgess and Elizabeth Howard, both working that day, were shot dead behind the counter. Customers Dennis Lever, Ronald Jerry, and Peter Nash were among those who tried to flee through a jam door, only to be gunned down. Some, like Carolyn Nash, managed to survive by lying hidden under their loved ones' bodies. Within about 90 seconds, Bryant had killed another 8 people and injured more. The car park shootings. 1:35 p.m. Exiting the gift shop, Bryant began firing across the car park and towards the information center. Royce Thompson, a coach driver, was shot and later died of his injuries. Kitchen manager Bridget Cook, trying to usher people to safety, was shot in the thigh but survived. Winifred Applin was fatally shot as she fled. Janet Quinn was wounded, and her husband Neville Quinn's desperate attempts to save her ended tragically, and Bryant shot her again, killing her as Neville held her. The terror continued around the coaches, with Bryant shooting and injuring several more people as he searched for survivors. The toll booth murders. 1:45 p.m. As panic spread, many fled towards the entrance toll booth in search of escape. Among them was Nanette Mycock, running with her daughters Alana, age 6, and Madeline, age 3. Bryant slowed his car beside them. Nanette approached, likely believing he was offering help. Instead, he forced her to her knees and, despite her pleas, shot her and her daughters in cold blood. Bryant then turned his attention to the nearby BMW of Mary Nixon and Russell Pollard. After shooting and killing the occupants, he transferred his weapons and supplies into their vehicle and drove away. Murder at the service station. 1:50 p.m. At the Port Arthur General Stores service station, Bryant blocked Glenn Pears and Zoe Hall in their car. He forced Glenn into the boot of the stolen BMW and then shot Zoe dead. Glenn would become his final hostage. The final stand at Seascape. 1:55 p.m. Bryant returned to Seascape, the scene of the first murders. There he fired upon passing vehicles, injuring Linda White and Susan Williams among others. He dragged Glenn Pears inside and handcuffed him to a staircase. As police arrived, Bryant fired on them, sparking an 18-hour siege, during which he made intermittent phone calls claiming his hostages were alive. In reality, Glenn Pears had been killed at some unknown point during the night. Capture and aftermath. The 29th of April 1996. At dawn, smoke began billowing from Seascape. Bryant had set the building ablaze, possibly accidentally igniting his stockpile of ammunition. At around 7:45 a.m., he burst out of the burning building, partially on fire. Stripping naked to douse the flames, he was quickly arrested. Bryant was treated for burns at Royal Hobart Hospital, though his presence caused considerable public outrage, given that victims and survivors were also being treated there. He was later convicted and sentenced to 35 life terms without the possibility of parole. The victims of Port Arthur. The following is a list of those killed in the Port Arthur Massacre. Winifred Joyce Applin, 58. Walter John Bennett, 66. Nicole Louise Burgess, 17. Sulang June, 32. Elva Rhonda Gaylord, 48. Zoe Ann Hall, 28. Elizabeth Jane Howard, 26. Mary Elizabeth Howard, 57. Mervyn John Howard, 55. Ronald Noel Jerry, 71. Tony Vadivelu Kiston, 51. Leslie Dennis Lever, 53. Sarah Kate Loudon, 15. David Martin, 72. Noellen Sally Joyce Martin, 69. Pauline Virginia Masters, 49. Alana Louise Mycock, 6. Madeline Grace Mycock, 3. Nanette Patricia Mycock, 36. Andrew Bruce Mills, 39. Peter Brenton Nash, 32. Wenda Joan Neander, 67. William Zing N.G., 48. Anthony Nightingale, 44. Mary Rose Nixon, 60. Glenroy Pears, 35. Russell James Pollard, 72. Jeanette Kathleen Quinn, 50. Aline Maria Salzman, 50. Robert Graham Salzman, 57. Katie Elizabeth Scott, 21. Kevin Vincent Sharp, 68. Raymond John Sharp, 67. Royce William Thompson, 59. Jason Bernard Winter, 29. Legacy: Changing Australia's Gun Laws. Before the Port Arthur Massacre, Australia's approach to gun ownership was relatively relaxed by international standards. Gun laws varied widely between states and territories, and private ownership of high-powered firearms, including semi-automatic rifles and shotguns, was not uncommon, particularly in rural areas. The tragedy at Port Arthur sparked an unprecedented national response. In the days that followed, public pressure mounted for immediate government action to prevent anything like it from ever happening again. The National Firearms Agreement NFA of 1996, just 12 days after the Port Arthur shootings, Prime Minister John Howard, leading a conservative government, announced a sweeping set of reforms known as the National Firearms Agreement NFA. The agreement was remarkable for its speed, breadth, and the level of political consensus it achieved across Australia's states and territories. Key elements of the NFA included a ban on semi-automatic rifles, semi-automatic shotguns, and pump-action shotguns. These weapons were seen as capable of inflicting mass casualties rapidly, as tragically demonstrated at Port Arthur. A national firearm licensing system. Prospective gun owners were now required to demonstrate a genuine reason to own a firearm, and self-defense was explicitly ruled out as a valid reason. A uniform system of firearm registration across all states and territories, which had not previously existed in several jurisdictions. Mandatory waiting periods, background checks, and safety training before any firearm purchase. Restrictions on the private sale of firearms. All sales were required to go through licensed dealers. The guiding principle behind the reforms was the view that gun ownership was a privilege to be earned, not a right. The gun buyback scheme, taking firearms out of circulation. To implement the new laws, the government introduced a massive national gun buyback program between October 1996 and September 1997. Under the scheme, around 650,000 firearms were collected and destroyed. Compensation was offered to gun owners who handed in banned weapons, with payouts funded by a temporary levy on income tax. The program cost approximately $500 million AUD at the time. The number of firearms surrendered represented roughly one-third of Australia's estimated total civilian firearms. It remains one of the largest gun buyback initiatives conducted anywhere in the world. Additional measures, ongoing firearms amnesty. Recognizing that not all illegal firearms had been surrendered during the original buyback, Australia has since periodically run further firearm amnesties. The most recent nationwide amnesty, conducted in 2017, led to the surrender of more than 57,000 additional firearms. Public response: controversial but effective. The new laws were not universally popular at first, particularly in rural communities where gun ownership was a long-standing part of life. Some gun lobby groups protested, and John Howard famously wore a bulletproof vest when addressing a rowdy crowd of gun owners at a rally in regional Victoria in 1996. Nevertheless, the majority of Australians supported the reforms, recognizing the need to act decisively in the wake of Port Arthur. A 1997 survey found 90% of Australians supported stricter gun controls. More than two-thirds approved of the gun buyback program. The impact: a safer Australia. Since the introduction of the NFA, Australia has not experienced another mass shooting defined as 5 or more deaths, excluding the perpetrator. On the scale of Port Arthur, firearm homicide rates have declined by approximately 59% between 1995 and 2006. Firearm suicide rates dropped by around 65% over the same period. Studies found no evidence of a substitution effect. That is, there was no corresponding increase in deaths by other means, led by pre-existing trends. Why Australia's gun reform after Port Arthur matters. Australia's response to the Port Arthur massacre is widely cited internationally as an example of effective, bipartisan public policy following a national tragedy. While debates about gun control continue around the world, Australia's experience stands as evidence that sweeping reforms, when coupled with public will, can make a significant difference. The Port Arthur massacre changed not just the lives of those directly affected, but the very fabric of Australian society, ensuring that such a tragedy would never so easily happen again.